Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, the festering tensions between Ukraine and Russia have taken a pretty sudden turn for the worse. In the last few days, the Russians have claimed that Ukraine orchestrated some kind of terrorist attack on Crimea that killed a Russian soldier and security officer. Ukraine denies it, but both sides appear to be putting their military on alert. Let's talk to Tom Burridge, who is in Kiev. And Tom, you have been to the unrecognised border between Crimea and Ukraine. And what is happening there?
Well, essentially, Ukrainians cross the border, Evan, to go on holiday, hit the beaches in Crimea, go on business, see family and friends. Pretty much business as usual this weekend. Pretty relaxed atmosphere there, at odds with the tension and rhetoric we've seen between Moscow and Kiev of recent days. We didn't see any evidence of a Ukrainian military build-up in that region either, driving extensively around the region, which sort of tallies with the idea and the sort of belief of most people that some kind of military incursion from the south by Russia is very, very unlikely. And all this tension is probably much more to do with the sort of wider Ukrainian-Russian NATO relations.
Right. Now, I mean, clearly the Russians said there was some kind of incident and a Russian soldier had been killed. I mean, what is the truth of it? What do we know about what actually happened?
Really hard question to answer, but I think that's often the case with Russian involvement or strategy vis-à-vis Ukraine. We've seen it in the east of Ukraine. We saw it in the original annexation of Crimea back in March of 2014. That, you know, the line between fact and fiction is often blurred. It makes it harder for Western countries to respond with their own strategy. What we know is, you know, around the time when this alleged plot that Russia's basically alleging what happened, there was some incident, some reports of firing on the sort of administrative border between Crimea and southern Ukraine. But one element of the sort of Russian account of events, if you like, doesn't really seem to stack up. The Russians saying an artillery bombardment by the Ukrainians into Crimea around the sort of time, just after basically. And in this day and age, you'd expect there to be some kind of video or audio evidence online if that were the case. And so far, we haven't seen anything of that. The other thing is that today we interviewed the brother of one of the Ukrainians who is now being detained by the FSB, alleged and basically accused of being one of the plotters, a guy sort of creeping into Crimea to carry out this alleged attack. And Yevgeny Panov, on the face of it, doesn't seem to have the profile of a sort of special ops soldier. In the words of his brother, he was overweight, could hardly run 100 meters without being out of breath. Until recently, he was basically a minibus driver at a nuclear power plant 150 miles from Crimea. And on the face of it, his brother's account, his animosity, and his claim, essentially, that his brother is a victim of a much bigger political picture seems genuine.
Tom, thank you very much. Well, there is basically one big strategic choice in foreign policy. Should you be tough or conciliatory? It's a question that is at the heart of our relationship with Russia. And remember that Britain is looking for new post-Brexit relationships. And remember, too, we no longer have the energy independence we used to enjoy. Well, we're joined by Sir Tony Brenton, former British ambassador to Russia, and Nancy Soderberg, who was Deputy National Security Advisor under President Clinton. A very good evening to you both. Nancy Soderberg, do you think this is a time for conciliation or toughness against in relation to Russia?
Vladimir Putin only understands toughness. The United States has gone through this. We tried to reset. It didn't work. He's looking for a fight, and we need to make sure that he doesn't get another one in Georgia or Ukraine. I think he's trying to fabricate incidents, and only toughness. The UK is moving troops, making it clear that we will defend our friends and allies, and that's the only message he's going to understand.
So, Tony.
Well, I don't entirely agree with that. Nancy is right that we need to be on our guard, and we need to not offer the Russians any opportunity to exploit weaknesses and disagreements amongst us. But the sad fact is that as a result of the events of the last 3 years, we're sliding quite rapidly towards what people are describing as a new Cold War. Now, those of us who remember the old Cold War remember that it was fantastically expensive and occasionally very dangerous. And it seems to me we need to be looking for ways of stopping that slide, i.e. looking for ways of cooperating with Russia where we can. And actually Syria is an obvious example where the United States is already finding ways where they can work with the Russians to help to get the situation under control.
Right. And I don't think you'll disagree with that, will you, Nancy Soderberg? Because
Not a bit. We obviously need Russia on our strategic challenges, not just in Syria, but also Iran, on nuclear nonproliferation. They still continue to support our arms control agreements and those pictures. But on their territorial disputes and their brute force against not only their own population, but some of their neighbors, I do think that we have to stand up to that. Of course, I'm a diplomat as well, and I believe in diplomacy, but I think with Russia, he does not understand conciliatory messages and will take every ounce that he can. So we need to have a strong force with NATO. We're having this debate in the United States with our own presidential candidate on the Republican side, questioning NATO, questioning our use of nuclear weapons. And I think any source of weakness that would come from the United States would be very dangerous for Britain and all of our allies in that region.
I mean, so Tony, you're going to agree that we should cooperate where cooperation is useful. It's on the other things. It's how you can possibly just overlook the fact that the Russian state appeared to be involved in the assassination of a British citizen, Litvinenko, here, that they invaded Crimea, just took it away from a sovereign nation. I mean...
Yeah, all of that is true. Russia is a pretty difficult international customer. But it is also true that Russia is not the great revanchist threat, which it has been very much presented as in Washington and in London. It's important to remember that Russia spends on its defence about 1/10 of what we in NATO do. It has an economy about 1/20 the size of ours. It is not a threat, and actually it sees itself as being threatened by us. So you're back in a classic situation where each side sees itself as threatened by the other, and you need to be looking for ways of getting those false impressions on both sides down.
Very quick answer on that one, Nancy Soderberg.
Well, it's Russia that's creating the false impressions by pretending it had to go to Ukraine's defense, by pretending it had to invade South Ossetia. So I think certainly we need to look at areas of cooperation, but Russia is a very dangerous regional power. It is no longer a superpower. So we're not headed towards a new Cold War, but we're headed towards the possibility of not having a partner in Russia and having a regional, very weak government lashing out in a dangerous way. So yes, we need to try and contain them as we did in the Soviet Union, but on a much smaller scale. And this president is not one that is going to understand anything but strength from NATO, and it's important to convey that.
You're not going to entirely agree on that point. Let's ask whether Brexit makes a difference to anything. So Tony, does Brexit mean we need Russia as a friend? Does it mean it's a time for a reset? Does it make any difference?
No, I don't think Brexit does make a huge difference. We've been very solidaire with the other members of the European Union, and at the hardish end of that. Our position on this, as I understand it, is not going to change very quickly. And from the EU's point of view, the rump EU's point of view, one big thing we've brought to their party has been our foreign policy and defence expertise. And I'm sure they will want to maintain those links as strongly as they can.
Now, Nancy Soderberg, I'm guessing you will worry about the effect of Brexit because Britain was the hawk in the EU and was basically pulling the EU to something closer to the US than your position, I think.
I mean, I think just the term a rump EU is not a good sign. I think it's a mistake for the UK to pull out of the EU. I think a stronger EU is in everyone's interest, a more integrated EU. And Vladimir Putin, I can guarantee, is sitting back loving this debate about watching Europe fall apart among itself over really no big issue. So I think it's unfortunate. I think it's survivable, but it doesn't help put a unified front against Russia when the biggest foreign policy power, the most respected part of the EU, frankly, leaves. That's not good for anyone.
Nancy Soderberg, Tony Brenton, thanks very much indeed.
I've been